Coach Jones, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today. It's a pleasure to speak with you. You have the second most wins in Ivy League history, most ever at Yale, and you're one of the longest tenured coaches in Division One basketball overall. I think there's 362 teams these days, and you're the fifth longest tenured in all of Division One. So very impressive track record. I know when you joined Yale, I think there was 316 teams at the time, and Yale was ranked right around 314. So not a great program when you joined, but certainly a great program today, and in large thanks to what you've done there over the last, I think, 25 years or so. So before we dive into some of the stuff you're doing today and what you've done over the years coaching Yale basketball, I think it'd be interesting to start with a little bit of your early days of coaching when you first got into it. I understand, after you graduated, you played basketball at Albany, and you went and graduated and started selling computers for a few years, and you were doing quite well there and from a business perspective, making good money and everything like that, but decided you wanted to go and coach the JV team, and ultimately ended up becoming head coach. So maybe you could talk about those early days and what exactly sort of got you snake bit with coaching basketball.
Well, Jake, really good to be on with you here. So I was working for a computer company, and as you said, made good money, but I was bored, and I got to the point where I didn't think I was doing anything for anybody but myself. And that will play in a little bit here in a minute. I ended up going to Albany to coach the JV team. I was going to get my MBA and go work on Wall Street because there was a lot of money being made in the late 80s. So I started coaching the JV team, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I knew basketball, but certainly thought I knew more than I did. And that first team I had was 17-3, and I thought coaching was easy. And at that point, I was snake bit. I ended up changing my master's degree from an MBA to educational administration, and the rest is history. I've been thankful to do what I do for a living, and I've just been very fortunate.
Why do you think you were able to have immediate success with the JV team going 17-3? Was it just that you guys had, really good players or an easy schedule, or was there some aspect of your first season of coaching that you think you did a great job in certain ways? Almost like a musical artist, they come out with their first album. Sometimes it's like their best album ever.
Yeah, I was just lucky. I ran into a kid by the name of Jason Graver who was on the team. And then, like I said, I thought coaching was easy. And it's easy when your players are better than everybody else. So that was the case early on. But at the same time, it was just the winning. It's the interaction with the young men that you coach. It's those kind of interpersonal communications that really has driven me over my time at Yale and my time in coaching that makes all the difference for me as a person.
Right. So what was the story from there? I know first season, I think you decided, I want to go and go full time at this. And I think you had your ambition at like being the head coach of a D1 team by the time you were 35 and ended up getting there a bit before then. What was like the path like for you from going from this first season coaching JV to ultimately becoming a head coach at Yale?
Well, I was trying to become a head coach by the time I was 40. I believe I started coaching head coach when I was 35. So, yeah, I got there a little early than expected. And, after that first year, like I said, I was snake bitten. And this was just like, all feet in. And I just started digesting what I was doing. That first year, Doc Sowers, the head coach at the time, asked me to go to a clinic in Rochester with him from Albany. And I really wasn't too keen on doing it. I had to drive him in a car and, both ways there and basically a chauffeur. And then I got to the clinic and Beeline was talking and I couldn't stop writing notes. There were so many things that he was talking about that I didn't know because my basketball experience as a coach was somewhat fractured and small. And so I ended up really enjoying that and started putting together a binder of all the plays and stuff that I saw that I liked and just became more of a student of the game. And I had an opportunity to work for Albany for 5 years. And then the assistant job came up at Yale, and I was fortunate enough to receive it, to get it. From Yale, I went to Ohio University for 2 years, and now I've been back at Yale for 25.
Yeah, it's a great story. I wonder, I wrote in my initial outreach to you, the context here, like I've had this podcast for a long time. Most of my background is in technology and entrepreneurship and investing. But I called the local high school and I wanted to see if I could kind of help out around the team a little bit. I had a guy when I played in high school who would, he wasn't there for every game or every practice, but he'd just kind of help out. And I was like, I'd like to just sort of help out the kids. I like mentoring younger people, whether it's in career or basketball or whatever it might be. Used to be career, now it's become basketball a little bit more. And so I wanted to see if I could help, and they were like, we could use a JV coach. So that's what sort of led me to fall into that position. And we just finished our, the first season that I spent coaching, and it was a phenomenal year, really like a perfect end. I could imagine I could coach for another 10 plus years and not have sort of like a better ending. We basically beat the best team on our schedule in the last game on their senior night, away game, overtime, 3-point play to tie it. Everything you can imagine, basically. It was just an awesome end to a an awesome season. And as I'm going into it, I'm like, well, yeah, I played in high school, but I was not as good of a player, for example, as you were, I understand, at Albany. And even more than that, I didn't really have like the basketball knowledge. I wasn't like, studying the game or practicing all that hard or anything like that when I was playing. And so as I came into this coaching experience, I'm like, I think I have a lot of the attributes that could make, a successful coach, but I definitely don't have like the basketball knowledge beyond just watching a lot of basketball throughout the course of my life. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, when you started, how much of that did you feel that you had from being a player versus how much did you have from, going clinics and taking things from Beeline or whatever it might be and sort of accumulating your basketball knowledge after you started coaching?
Yeah, I certainly did after I started coaching. As I said, like, I started coaching and well, you could, my basketball knowledge, you probably could put in a thimble at that time. As a player, I played the game. I watched it. I loved it, but I didn't understand it fully. I didn't know it fully.
Right.
And so that was what that was I was tasked to do. So as an assistant at Albany for 5 years, there's a lot to learn because like when you're an assistant coach at a Division III school, you do a little bit of everything from cleaning laundry to mopping floors and driving a van. So you have your hand in everything. And from there to go to come to Albany, come to Yale and as an assistant coach and coaching the Division I, my first experience. And there was just a lot to learn. And like I said, I made myself a study of it to make sure that when I had an opportunity, I was going to be ready.
Right. And how about the difference between being an assistant and being a head coach? It sounds like when you were head coach of JV, you were also assistant of varsity, and you've sort of bounced between, mostly you spent time as an assistant before becoming a head coach, but how different and difficult are sort of the transitions from one to another?
Well, the transition for me wasn't hard. I think that what happens with you as an assistant coach, you have this inner voice that grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and it gets to the point where it starts yelling at you that it's your time to be a head coach. And I remember when I was at Albany, I was maybe my third year in, as my knowledge started to grow and I started to understand more, and I wanted to be more impactful to what was going on and what we were doing. And I remember, talking to Coach Sowers about we could do this, we could do this, we could do that, we could do like and just rambling on to him. And he listened to me and then he stops. He goes, James, when you get your own job, you could do whatever the hell you want. But right now we're doing things my way. So that was something that, made me understood where my place was. And I was just a person that offered suggestions, and those suggestions, you had to be smart about how you offer them because you just can't bombard a head coach with 1,000 suggestions. And then when I was at Ohio University, I knew I was ready to become a head coach when head coach Larry Hunter started using my suggestions in practice and games. So if I was good enough, if my suggestions were good enough for him to use, well, then why couldn't I use it myself?
Do you think you could have developed into the head coach that you've become, or, now you've had 25 years of experience, so it's a little different, but when you first started head coaching, do you think those early years as an assistant contributed to your development more so than had you been, for example, a head coach at lower levels? Or do you think that you could develop sort of equally well or potentially even better, rising the ranks a little bit as a head coach at lower levels rather than an assistant in college?
Well, I think it all depends on the person. I think it all depends on that person. For me, this was natural to do what I did as an assistant coach and to learn under a couple of different people and to have an idea. Because a lot of times you learn what not to do as an assistant coach. I think a lot of times when you're on the ground and you're watching, it's a lot easier to learn that way than it is with those coaches that have never worked for anybody else. I think it's hard for them to manage a staff and understand your staff, but that's a big part about what we do. The reason that we're really successful at Yale is because I think I have the best staff in the league, and they help me tremendously in terms of everything that we do. And I make sure they're vested and they feel included in that. And I think that's a big part of understanding. If you never were an assistant coach or wasn't an assistant coach very long, you might have a hard time understanding what it's like to be an assistant and to treat the assistants the way they need to be treated to help you be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, and I understand, you did some coaching with U.S. basketball as well, and that was a nice reminder after, many years not being an assistant and being a head coach. You got to get a reminder again of what it's like to be an assistant. I'm sure that was pretty fruitful for coming back to the program at Yale and maybe making some tweaks around how you worked with your assistants there. But I want to get into Yale and your coaching philosophy there and basically your key principles. Just for a bit of context for the listeners, it's pretty incredible to look at, like, I think this is your, correct me if I'm wrong, it's your 25th year at Yale, but your 24th season due to taking a year off with COVID. And the first 15 years, I think it was 15 seasons, uh Yale finished, I think, first place maybe once in the Ivy League. And it was like a competitive team. I think you guys were in the top half of the league for almost every season. I think all but one. I think you finished fifth one year, but everything else was like second,
No,
third, fourth.
no, 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 no. Every season we've been in the top half of the league except for my first year.
Okay, yeah. So that was maybe the fifth place finish was the first year. So it's been, you guys were a top half of the Ivy League for your entire, first 15 years coaching, but couldn't quite get over the hump to like be first. You got there once, I think. And then since then it's been like it's a totally different story. The last 8 seasons, you've won the Ivy League more often than not. I think 5 times first or tied for first, maybe one second, a couple times third. You've won the conference tournament a couple times, NCAA tournament appearances a few times, including the big win over Baylor, fifth seed in 2016. So like this has become like a super legitimate program in the last 8 seasons. And not that it, wasn't good for the 15 before that. Like we said, it was top half of the league every year. But was there something like sort of specific that clicked in these last, basically you can cut your coaching career at Yale into thirds. So the first 2 thirds and then the most recent third. And the most recent third has been wildly successful. Is there something that happened or just the accumulation of little things that kind of turned the corner for the program?
Well, first, like we've been first and second the last 8 years, except for one year we finished in third. So in terms of what's going on, like when I first got the job at Yale, I'm sure you recall that Penn and Princeton had a dominance over the league for 40 years. So to overtake a dominance, it took some time to build and have people believe in you. We won a championship in our third year, but it was on piss and vinegar. And, we were nowhere near as talented as those other teams were that year. So it's it's really difficult to win a championship if your team isn't as talented as your opponents. And we were not as talented as our opponents top to bottom. So that growth over time that it took to build and have student athletes believe in what we were doing at Yale, that's what took time and that's what's changed. The other part about it is that, you talk about our philosophy in terms of what we're doing. I think that's been a big part of it as well. What we've done is that we've cultivated who we are. We have a program now in a culture, and that culture is based on defending, rebounding, and sharing. And we feel if you do those 3 things at a high level, you're going to have a chance to be really successful. So I think that if you would have asked my first 15 years, asked the players on my team what Yale basketball was, you might come up with 15 different answers if you ask 15 different kids. But now, if you ask any kid in the last 10 years or so what Yale basketball is based on, or who we are, they'll tell you we're going to rebound, defend, and share the ball. So I think that's been a big part of it too.
Yeah, so let me ask you, for those first 15 years, are you getting different answers because it changed from year to year what your, two or three or four main focuses were, like what Yale basketball was? Or was it because you didn't as explicitly have a two or three th or four things at all,
We
and you
did
just had a bunch of things?
we didn't explicitly, not like we had a bunch of things. It just we changed a little bit year to year in terms of what we emphasized and who we were, because it had to change in terms of the players that we had. I mean,
Right.
like you can say you want to rebound, defend, and share, but if you don't have the players that can do that, well, that's kind of hard to have that concepts for your team. So it took a while to have that growth and understanding, but I don't think we were as clear cut. And again, my first head coaching job, I don't believe we were as clear cut in terms of what we were demanding from our young men as we are now.
Yeah, and it seems to me, I'm sort of studying these different coaches and their philosophies and trying to piece together my own. And this year, like I said, it's JV high school, so it's a very different game. And I had our three focuses basically. It was like 100% effort, um, strong team defense, and fast break points, because most of these points in these games are coming from like transition layups and things like that, or the other team's turning it over and things like that. So. Those were like sort of the three focuses. Yours being rebounding, defending, sharing the ball. Obviously, it's a different game, like I said. But how did you arrive at those three things? Because like obviously they're fundamental. Defense, super fundamental. Rebounding, super fundamental. Sharing the ball, maybe the least obvious of the three. How did you sort of come to those as like the three tenets?
Well, I think that like when you're trying to base your team and build it, you start with defense. For me, that's my thought. I was always a heavily defensive minded coach, to the point where we've had practices to start the year where we wouldn't even take a shot because I was trying to emphasize how important defense was. Being able to stop people. So that's where it started with the defense. And then rebounding is something that's always been a part of who I was as a player, and the importance of that. But the one thing that we do with it is that we have rebounding drills in practice every single day. There's a reminder about rebounding every single day. We practice foul line blockout. So I've talked to coaches that tell me they don't even do any rebounding drills in practice. So that was a big part of it. And the sharing, as you said, the least obvious of the three, it's the most important because it's hard to have young men on your team feel vested if they don't feel like they're a part of the offense. And we had a young man in our program that was the blackest black hole out of anybody that's ever played college basketball. His name is Greg Mangano, and Greg led the league in scoring, rebounding, and block shots. And if his head wasn't made out of bricks, he'd be just retiring from the NBA right now. But he had a long career playing overseas. In any event, I had him in my office one day, and because he wouldn't pass the ball to anybody, he had 17 assists his senior. No, sorry, 14 assists his senior year. So that's like his entire senior year, he had 14 assists. And I brought him in my office. I set him down. I showed him video of him getting triple team in the post and trying to score and turn the ball over. And I thought it would be easy for him to understand the importance of passing the ball. But he looked at me, looked at the video, looked at me, looked at the video, and said, "Coach, I think we're better off with me shooting than passing to either one of those two guys that are wide open." So at this point, I knew I had to change because it wasn't Greg Mangano problem. It was a James Jones problem because our offense was geared to get him the ball. But I thought that he would understand the importance of finding somebody if he was double teams and for whatever reason he could not understand that concept.
Right. So I'd like to sort of plug into each of those things. They're all very interesting. The first being teaching defense, always being a defensive minded coach. One of the things that's been interesting for me, I had to get through like some state licensing stuff. So I actually wasn't even able to join the team until after like a few weeks of practice, basically. And so I didn't have like a full opportunity to have like a preseason. And, if and when I coach again, I'm looking forward to doing that. And so I basically had to pick very few things to practice because my practices were basically limited to, in between games when sometimes you have to rest legs and there's only so much you can basically teach when you have like as many practices as you do games over the course of the season. So next year, I definitely want to like sequence things out more explicitly and be able to teach more than I was able to get in this year. How do you think about sequencing the things that you introduced to your team from, day one of practice onward? And particularly, maybe it might be easier to sort of explain that and go through that with just a defensive only sort of approach. How do you sort of stage teaching defense over the course of a season and training defense?
Well, we start off by one-on-one. Then we get to two-on-two, three-on-three, four-on-five, and we build it up to five-on-five. It's a slow build in terms of what we're doing, creating concepts. We start with a lot of closeouts because that's a huge part about what we do because we're a gap-oriented team. So we're going to help out in the gaps, which is going to cause closeouts. And if your closeouts are bad, that's going to lead to easy offense from other teams. They get you in scramble mode. They want to bend and break you. So we want to make sure that our defense doesn't bend and we stay strong and we help each other out and we also help the helper. So we start off with one-on-one drills, like I said, two-on-two, three-on-three, and we build up to our shell, four-on-four, and we do five-on-five shell. So that's the progression of it. And then as you get into the season, we started, obviously we have our concepts and our philosophies on how we're playing defensively. As I said, gap help and recover. But then we start going over the scouts for each teams in terms of what they do and how they play and making sure that we're able to take away either what they do a lot or what may give us problems.
Right. I grew up a big Syracuse basketball fan, so obviously like a fan of the 2-3 zone. And when I got to this high school team this year, that's what they had run some man, but they had also run some zone. And I just decided based on the simplicity of it, to stick with the zone. So we ran the zone the entire season. Have you ever been intrigued or interested by the zone, whether it's, obviously you haven't converted to it, full time, but using it in certain moments or against certain teams for certain reasons?
No, I have no belief in zone at all. I don't
Why is
believe.
that?
Well, number one, let's start off with younger kids. I don't think we should ever teach young kids to play a zone. They don't learn any concepts of playing a man because the game's going to break down to man to man. And unless you can guard man to man, it's going to be very, very difficult to be successful. So for me, unless you are a Syracuse zone where that's what you do 99% of the time, then all you're doing with your zone is you're rolling the dice and hoping another team misses. You're hoping that you're trying to change up tempo sometimes that we may use. I mean, I don't know if we played a zone possession more than 2 or 3 zone possessions all year. It's just not something I feel comfortable with in terms of holding guys accountable. It's hard to hold kids accountable when you're playing a zone because there's always somebody else they can point to as, well, coach, I thought he was going to, no. In a man-to-man, you can point things out in terms of what you're going to do a great deal easier for me. And that's
Yeah.
just who I am. That's how I was brought up. So it's not something I believe in. I think it's hard to be successful if you're playing a zone. I think that you can schematic and beat some teams, but I think it's hard to win championships playing zone.
Yeah, makes sense. And then moving over to rebounding, you mentioned you do a lot of drills, including like, boxing out on free throws and things like that. What are some of your favorite rebounding drills that you think are most effective?
Well, like we start the year off doing what was called animal ball back when I was a player, where you have um, 3 teams and you set them up around one team along the foul line, one team on one lane line, the other team around the other lane line. So let's go blue, white, and gray. So one player from each team is in, and they got to get a rebound and they got to get a score while 2 guys are trying to defend them. Once he scores, one guy scores, the drill doesn't stop. Someone from his team bounces in to try to score as well. And you keep doing that to every one of your players on your team scores. So the guys around the lane line and the foul line, if the ball is coming out, they just tip it back in. It's sort of like a cage match of guys fighting for the ball. So that's one thing that we do that I like in terms of teaching toughness, because if you're not tough, it's hard to be successful in that drill.
Yeah.
And then we do a drill like it's 3-on-3. You have 3 guys around the perimeter. There's a coach, and he's going to pass it to one of the guys on the perimeter. You have 3 guys in the lane, and they're numbered 1, 2, and 3. The coach is going to call one of the numbers. So say he calls 2 and passes the ball to one of the wings. Whoever's 2 has got to get out to that wing and contest the shot. The other 2 guys have got to talk and communicate who's going to block out the other 2 guys. And the defense has got to get 3 defensive rebounds in a row to get out. If the offense gets the ball, they just continue to play offense. If they score, they get another rebound, they keep scoring. It doesn't stop until the defense gets a rebound, but it only counts as one if you get the first miss. If you get the second or third miss, you're just playing and you start back at zero.
Right. So a lot
So
of toughness and conditioning in these rebounding drills as well, not strictly like focused on just, rebounding or the particulars of how to best secure rebounds, but really live action and 3-on-3 and stuff like that.
so let me tell you something. If you're in that drill and you got to get three to get out, and you get two, four times and you don't get it, you know how desperate you become and how much you want, like how important a rebound becomes to you. And that's the concept that we're trying to get off to our kids on everyone. We want every kid to think that it's the fourth time around and you're trying to get trying to get a rebound and you're tired and you're beat up. And that's how important it is for you to get this rebound. We'd like our kids to think of every rebound that way.
Yeah, it sounds like a great drill. Are there others, expanding rather than narrowing to just rebounding? Are there other drills that you feel are just like
Yes,
you need a
there's a
go-to drill or two?
there's a ton of them that we do. Like I said, we do a different one every day. We do dummy rebounding where we just practice swing, swing, and spin. We do the ball in the air and off the ground, and you got to jump up and grab it with two hands. We do back to back where we just have guys line up along the middle of court, and they get back to back, and they're trying to get position, and low man wins, and who gets more space. And so, yeah, there are a ton of drills that we do.
How did you build your playbook of drills over the years? Was it, going to clinics and listening to guys like Beeline? Was it, like how do you think about like the framework for building your set of how you've built practice?
I think the great thing about coaches is that we all steal from each other, and there's a number of different places where you can find drills. And like I'll go to a high school practice and I'll get a drill from a high school practice. I'll watch a video and I'll get a drill from a video that just comes like now. Like I get all these videos set and like I don't watch them all, but you watch videos of other coaches and you find things out. So it's just and you just find what you think you like, and I think that's what it is. I found things that I like over the years from a number of different sources, not just one, just a number of different sources to help me become a better coach. And now 25 years in, there's not much that I add new, but every now and again, like my assistant coach may come up with something, or I may see something that I'm someplace and, oh yeah, I'd like to add that. That's a nice morsel that I'd like to add. And I was actually talking to my team, my staff the other day, and I've probably forgotten half the drills I've done over the course of 25 years.
Right. So another thing you mentioned was, keeping players vested. It helps to share the ball, make everyone feel like a part of the game. Another challenge is, not just for the guys who are in there, making sure everyone touches the ball, but for the guys who you just can't play that many minutes, passing the minutes around as a coach. So how do you think about, a couple questions here. One is the actual number of players on the team. I think this year you've got like 16, 17 players, which might be higher than usual for you. So how do you think
Yes.
about like the right number of players? And then once you have them, how do you think about, spreading minutes and communicating with the guys who aren't getting as many or any minutes about, why they're not and how they can still help the team and everything like that?
Well, we have 16 players on our roster, mainly due to COVID. We have a junior class of 6 guys because we had 2 guys take gap year. So in any event, that's why we have the number that we have. In terms of making sure guys are vested, I think it's something that you got to communicate every day in practice how important guys are, because you can't play everybody, and everybody's got to understand that. Like, I mean, you're going to have an 8-9 man rotation, maybe 10 in some spots in some situations, but you're not going to play 10 players every game. At least most coaches aren't. So you want to make sure that those young men that come to practice every day, that they understand their importance, and you got to have conversations with them where we meet 3-4 times a year to talk about who they are and what they're doing. We chart every practice every day, and those kids that aren't playing, they know what their numbers are. This is why you're not playing, because the guys above you are doing better than you are. So you got to be better in practice. So that's one way to motivate those guys to be better in practice, to try to get there. because again, everybody can't play. And I'm at Yale, so it's logic and there's intelligence. So kids understand that, like, okay, well, Johnny's better. Johnny shoots 38% from the arc, and I shoot 28%. Why would coach put me in the game over Johnny? Because he likes me? No, because Johnny's better than I am, or Johnny's shot the ball better than I am, and I have to prove myself. I have to work hard. I have to get in the gym. I think that's one of the things that our guys do. The kids that don't play, they're heavily involved in the gym, getting extra time, getting extra lifts, getting stronger because they want to play. So it's a motivation thing for them, and you want to have kids like that. And the fortunate that for us that we do.
Right. So what is understanding this is an unusual year because of COVID, what's your ideal number for number of players on the team?
I'd say about 16 guys, and maybe one of them being a walk-on. So 15 kids you recruited and one kid being a walk-on that's happy to be there. But, most of the walk-ons I have, they're not treated like walk-ons. They're treated like every other player on the team. And they feel like they're a recruited athlete too. So, they want to play as well. And, they're pretty, I've had walk-ons that have helped us in games. So, we want to make sure that, we get that like 15, 16 guys because, not 4-on-4, 2-on-2, having an even number, that usually works for me.
Right. And then just because I've been thinking about this a lot, actually, I'm curious, like, what would be the key problems for you if you had 12 guys or 19 guys, let's say, like way too many, way too little. What are like
Well,
what comes into play as the problem?
well, 19, you got too many disgruntled employees. So if you're playing 8 and you got 19, so that means there are 11 disgruntled employees on your team. So that's more guys. And of the 8 guys that you play, 2 or 3 of them are probably not 100% happy because they're not starting, right? So now you have maybe 13 disgruntled employees, and that's way more than you want to have because now that locker room, in a sense of voices that you hear, what I like to think of when guys complain in my locker room, if they do, somebody shuts them down because it's more about the team than it is about an individual. So I think that having too many guys and having too many guys that don't play, misery loves company, and you can get guys kind of like feeling one way about themselves together, which is no good for your program. And
Yeah.
then if you have 12, the 12 is the injury problem. Like if you get too many guys injured, you can't even practice. You got 3 guys injured, can't practice today. Can't practice 5-on-5 anyway. So that limits what you can do if you have injuries.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So 15, 16 being kind of the sweet spot and 16 maybe preferable for 4-on-4, 2-on-2, having even numbers and things like that. That makes a lot of sense. So moving to slightly different topic. I know right now you're on a recruiting trip and taking this call from the car, which I appreciate. Like I said, obviously that's a busy part of being a coach, at the college level, coaching D1. Just out of curiosity, like how much time, at different points in the season, off season, in season, et cetera, do you spend on recruiting as sort of a piece of the overall pie? And you mentioned also earlier, kind of the two big differences between your first 15 years and the last 8 or 10 was, not only installing this very explicit philosophy, which anyone in the last 8 or 10 years could reiterate and knows well, but also just fundamentally getting better players and the time it takes to be able to recruit better players and build a better program. So, curious about the time allocation bit and then also how you've improved in the recruiting department over time.
Um, I'm sorry, say that first part again. Time allocation in terms of recruiting. We're always recruiting. You're never not recruiting. Like it's year round in terms of how much time. It's hard to put a time or a number on how much you do, but you're recruiting the kids that are still in your program still. You're re-recruiting them. You're re-recruiting the kids that are committed to you. And now you're looking for the next class of guys that you handle it in the class behind them. So there's all kinds of emails and text messages and phone calls that go on, kids visiting campus, going off to see kids. I don't see too many kids during the course of the year because it's very difficult to fly places to see kids. So that's tough to do. But I do get out probably a half dozen to a dozen times throughout the basketball season to watch somebody play, unless they're local. some local kids I can see a little bit on like a Tuesday night after practice. That makes it easy. But taking a trip to fly somewhere or drive 3 or 4 hours, that's probably somewhere between, you know, 8 to 12 times a year during the season. Um, in terms of our recruiting getting better, I think that, it's gotten better because we've had more success. It's easy to sell a program when you've won championships. It's easy to sell a program when you've had a kid drafted in the NBA. It's easy to sell a program when you have first team all league players. It's easier to do that because people want to be. That's why Penn and Princeton was so successful. Why they had such a stronghold on this league for so long is because of their success.
Right. So, another question, sort of going on a tangent, like I think the little things that you do as a coach, at least this was sort of what I was telling the kids this year, was like a lot of the little things you do as a coach and you do as a player, all these little things, you do them right and you do them well, and they add up to, the big things. Bill Walsh, famous football coach, has a book, The Score Takes Care of Itself. There's stories of, John Wooden tells a story how when he started the first team meeting, I think he told the players how to put on the socks and tie their shoes so that they could avoid blisters and things like this. Are there particular little things that you've done or sort of implemented at Yale over the years that may not even be sort of obviously basketball related that you think have had sort of an outsized impact in improving the program?
Well, I do something every day. I'm not sure when I came up with this. I have a word of the day, and it's something that goes on, or something I think our team needs. So I talk about it, and I have it on a practice plan, and the guys have got to read it. And when we have a drink break at practice, I ask the one kid the word of the day. If he doesn't know, we do push-ups. And then he says the word and gives a definition, and then I kind of get on a soapbox and talk about something I think our team needs. Like, if I have guys that are frustrated, the word of the day may be frustration, and explain that and explain why it's harmful for our team. I think that gives me a way of being able to get inside and to be able to talk to our guys about something that is about basketball, but not directly about basketball.
What do you think might be some of your most frequently reoccurring words over the years?
Oh, that's hard for me to say. I mean, I think that the thing that we do most often is to let the kids know that we love and care for them, and that they always have somebody that has their back. I think that's what's the main thing that's important. Kids don't care what you know until they know you care. So, I think that's the message that I've tried to send over the course of my time here.
Right. So one more question, and then I want to get into just a little bit on actually this season, very exciting season. But one more question, sort of more generally on coaching. What's your when you get into the game and you're like the game is ongoing, what's your style during the game as a coach? What are you focused on? What do you have the assistants focused on because you don't really want to focus on that? Bring me like into a game situation as the coach. What do you think you do differently than other coaches?
I have no idea what other coaches do or what other coaches go through their mind. I know with me, I'm looking at, obviously both sides of the ball in terms of how they're guarding what we do. And then are we sticking to our game plan of how we're trying to guard them? Those are the two areas in which I'm paying most attention to. My assistant coaches may be watching ball screen coverage or matchups for a given game, who's guarding whom, or where we have an advantage, or who they have an advantage against, and how we want to take care of that. But those are the things that go through my mind. It's hard to say, what other coaches are thinking about or what they're concentrating on when they watch a game.
No, yeah, that's a great answer. That's what I was looking for. So now turning the page a little bit to focus on this season, talk about this season a little bit. Um, I heard you quoted on another podcast saying this was probably the best team you've ever had, top to bottom. And so far in the season, I think that was maybe a preseason podcast or early season so far. Your guys' performance has reflected that. Doing very well in the league and also just against other opponents. Two of your handful of losses have been, one was at Gonzaga, the other was at Kansas. Actually, just on that, while I bring that up, I understand scheduling has been sort of an interesting thing that you've developed over the years as well for getting Yale to be able to play against more difficult teams. But it's been challenging, right? Like people don't want to play Yale because it could be like if you get beat, then it's like a bad loss, but there's not a whole lot of upside. So how do you go about getting like schools like Gonzaga and Kansas on the schedule?
Well, you get lucky sometimes. Like right now, this year, we're having a hard time finding high major games for next year for the reasons you just stated. Um, you know, so there are relationships that you have with certain guys, and you can call up guys and ask them if you want to play. That you have friends. Like I was trying to get a game with Purdue because I know Painter. We run a basketball committee for the U19 team with USA Basketball, and same thing with Jamie Dixon at TCU. We have a kid in Dallas trying to get home. It's just been very difficult to try to for people to play us. It's something that it's a challenge, and I guess it's a good thing because it means we're pretty good, but it just makes my life a little bit more difficult than putting a schedule together.
Yeah, it makes sense. So, anyway, aside from those couple of difficult games this year, you guys, and even in the, I think Kansas game, you were up at halftime, like really, I think historically, even over the last several years, when you guys get to play these big matchups, you show up, and that's why people probably don't want to play Yale. So far this season, I guess, what's your, if you could sort of pause for a moment and just sort of like look back on where you guys are and where you've gotten to right now, and obviously a good chunk of league games coming up and postseason play. So, what's your evaluation at this point of the season, and what do you think you guys need to sort of improve upon or do better to finish the season the way you want to?
Well, I think that early on in the season, we were trying to find our way. And I think that we've finally gotten to the point where we've gotten to be in a good place in terms of understanding who we are and how we should play. And as I look at my team right now, it's similar to what I envisioned at the start of the year. I think that we can be a little cleaner offensively. Teams are kind of throwing junk at us a little bit. Matchups, putting a four-man on our five-man, playing a triangle and two, switching all our screening action. So, you know, um, we need to continue to make sure that offensively we're fluent, and when we get a lead, to stay with the same thing we're doing. We've had times where we've gotten a little careless when we've gotten a lead. So I think those are the areas that I'd like to improve. I like what we're doing defensively. We are the best team in the league in our league offensively and defensive in terms of efficiency. So if we can keep that up, we'll have a good chance at winning the conference.
Right. And I know you guys had, I think, four starters from last year returning, all of whom averaged double figures, I believe. So that's always a good sign. And then you've got another guy who returned, Danny Wolf, who is the leading scorer this season. And I think he averaged just a couple points last year. So maybe just taking that as a case study, like that seems like from afar, without being, super familiar with Danny or anything, that seems like an incredibly impressive year of development. Is there something that happened there that you can point to?
No, I think it was just Danny's time. I think last year Danny had a learning curve, and he was behind two seniors that were really good. So I think that was the biggest issue. And I think it's great when a freshman could come in and learn as opposed to trying to figure it out for himself. So he's certainly ready to play right now, and he's proven that. He's done a great job for us, and I think his best basketball is ahead of him. And I look forward to having an opportunity to watch him grow.
How does Yale differ from, or maybe you can speak for sort of the Ivy League at large to some extent, differ from a lot of other teams, the top teams in college basketball that, have to deal more so with, on the one hand, transfers, and then on the other, for, some of the top programs, obviously NBA, people leaving early for the NBA. How is Yale and the Ivy League a little bit different? Do you view that as sort of like a positive that you maybe have to deal less so with those things? How do you think about that?
Well, we actually lost Mie only a year early, which was not good. But like you said, that's a rarity that you have when guys going to leave early. But it's great for our league that we could stay together and not have our rosters just explode and change so often. I think that I look at college basketball tonight now, and it doesn't look like anything that it was when I first started. and we're in a state of transition. It's not what it was, and it's not what it's going to be. And it's going to be. I'll be curious to see what it looks like after I retire, and how college basketball works. It's a tremendous sport. It's a great watch on television. So I hope that it doesn't change too much. But I'm actually afraid for our sport in terms of some of the things that have come into it and what's happening. And we are certainly. I suspect that most college coaches would prefer to be coaching in the Ivy League, just in terms of how our rosters remain the same, as opposed to all the craziness they have to deal with the transfer portal and NIL.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I know even just from when I watched college basketball growing up to today, it's changed tremendously. Obviously, you had some NBA exits at that time, but not nearly the transfers. And it seemed like just a lot less one and done in terms of the NBA guys as well. Last question for you. Again, I appreciate all the time, but for this season, looking back, or even if there's nothing from this season that stands out, just overall in your coaching career, is there a particular story of a team and a game, or even an individual player or coaching moment? I'm sure there's a million of them, but is there one that stands out that you can maybe tell or speak to? Just because I know from doing what I did this year, there's just so many moments that are so cool and really awesome in terms of having an impact on a kid's life or having an impact on the team and how they remember their experience. Is there a story that comes to mind that you might be able to tell?
Yeah, so we won the first year in which we went to the NCAA tournament was 2016. We had won the championship in 2015, tied with Harvard. We had beaten Harvard on Friday night at their place, and we went up to Dartmouth. If we win that game, we win the outright championship in Ivy League for the first time in 40 years or whatever it was. And we ended up losing the game on a last-second shot play by Dartmouth. Horrific loss for the program. The next year, we never really talked about it. We built up, and so we go up to Cornell, and we beat Cornell, and we're 12-1 at the time, and I think we're one game ahead of Princeton, and so maybe tied with Princeton. I'm not sure. And then, so we're on a bus driving to Columbia, and everybody on the team is on their device watching their game on the Ivy League Digital Network at the time. And there was a kid by the name of Steve who tapped the ball, who blocked the shot. He scored a basket and blocked the shot to seal the win for Harvard. And at that point, we won the Ivy League championship. And there was just unbelievable joy, childhood joy of our players jumping up and screaming and yelling on a bus because they're so happy that they won. It was like, if you watch, 12-year-olds win the Little League World Series, that was the feeling that went through the bus, and it was something that I'll never forget, and I'm certain the players won't either.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was fortunate to experience something like that at a, it's a little easier to find those moments, like you said, with the younger kids maybe, and I was fortunate to have that be sort of the end to our season the other day, which is part of what made it such a cool experience. So anyway, sounds awesome to be able to recreate that at the D1 level. Obviously, these guys are becoming men at that point, and it becomes even harder to sort of find that childhood joy and a real genuine celebration. So anyway, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all these nuggets of wisdom with me. Is there anywhere you want to send people to, follow you or Yale basketball and keep in touch with you on your journey?
Well, yeah, there's a Yale basketball on Instagram. So just go to Yale basketball on Instagram, Yale Finance, and that's a great way to follow us.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Coach. I really appreciate it.
You be good, man. Take care.